I'm so excited today to be talking to Sage T. Greene about their new novella, Touched. Let's get started with a really fun question. Sage, what is your favorite part of the novella?
Well, obviously, I enjoy all of it. I think it's a really lighthearted and just comfortable, cozy read. But I found that writing, what I actually enjoyed were the more somber moments in between all of the joy. I really liked being in the space of this sort of self internalized conflict, which is like the driving force of the novella. And specifically, there was a scene between the brothers in the library where they're really having a heart to heart. And I just found it very cathartic, this moment where they're opening up to each other and really sort of seeing each other in full for the first time.
Yeah, I love that scene. I feel like it can kind of challenge some, maybe preconceived notions of these two characters. And it was really rewarding to see that full journey when they, kind of confront their feelings and discuss and really dig into it.
Yeah, that's such a real thing between siblings too. Like they're affected by their birth order, and obviously this is heightened stakes because they're royals, so one is the heir to the throne, but just sort of like older versus younger sibling, different expectations set upon each of them. A lot of us don't necessarily verbalize that to each other and have that sort of full circle moment. So it was fun to explore.
Yeah, and I'm an only child, so I've never lived that, but I've seen obviously friends. My husband has an older brother. Like I've seen that dynamic with other people, so it's really fun to see it play out in the text as well. And it's one of those things that makes reading fun because, it's something I can't personally relate to, but I still found it really meaningful to watch and read and consume. Awesome. Okay, so what is the main message that you hope readers take away from Touched?
Yeah, so the sort of thesis statement of Touched is one of self appreciation, where you on your own are more than enough. There's not really a main antagonistic, like outside force in Touched. It's more the expectation of perfection and these sort of societal things. So the sort of drumbeat of the story is self-reflection and self-acceptance, where by the end, hopefully you feel like I am enough. I am okay. So just having sort of a gentle heart with yourself, I think, is the main message.
Yeah, and I found that you were able to do that because there wasn't a main antagonist person. I feel like in many stories, when the antagonist is like a character, they're a person or a non-human being, if it's like that kind of fantasy type story, so often it can be very laser focused on like that relationship. And so when there isn't a character antagonist and it's kind of that like man versus society, it allows you to really dig into it. And I feel like you did it really, really well. And I really loved this story, and that's why we're talking. So,
Well, thank you.
um, uh, how did you come up with the idea of the touched people within the book? For those who aren't familiar, the things that stand out to me that make them different from like regular humans, so to speak, are longer lifespan, some magic ability, and then like, the good old fancy pointed ears.
Yeah, so the touched are basically an analog for elves, very common in fantasy. And what I was thinking about was, okay, but not everybody, it's a mixed society. So there's the touched, and then there's people with common blood, is how it's phrased. And it seemed clear to me that if we have a society with some people who are touched, that they would kind of be elevated into this leadership position. But then I kind of asked, like, why would that be the case? And that's sort of dealt with in the story, especially in the latter half, is, just because people have certain abilities or live longer, they're given this prestige. Is that earned or is that owed to them? So that's something we get a little bit into. And writing wise, it was a departure for me. In previous work, you had a similar thing with, people with abilities. It makes for a fun story. Where in previous work, I had that where that was something you could learn. Anyone could be one of those people. Whereas this was more classic, like you're born with this sort of special ability. So it was just something I wanted to explore, and I used a more familiar format for it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I really liked how in the story how we grapple with the earned versus owed,
Hmm.
and how there is a little bit of merit, right? That if you live longer, you have like more time to build wisdom. Like
Yeah.
that makes sense. But is that enough? Does that automatically beget you a leadership position? No, someone could live long and still be like a poor choice to be in charge, and someone could be young and be an excellent leader. So I really liked how you grappled with it. And there isn't necessarily like a super defined, clear cut, like, okay, we've made this decision, we're moving on. But like the
Hmm.
characters do address it. And I thought you handled it really well. And this is one that I always love to dig into and talk to different authors about. In fantasy, there's a lot of like behind the scenes world building that like you as the author need to know, and it doesn't end up like making it into the final text, especially for the first installment. So, how much backstory or world building attached did you end up having to cut to get to the version that you have today?
Yeah, well, thankfully, I was pretty comfortable with the length that I ended up at during writing. So there wasn't a lot that I needed to cut, especially at novella length. But there was some stuff, primarily having to do with previous leaders in the kingdom. By name, we hear about Queen Phaedra, and then before that, King Wesley. And I think there's a lot in a story that has to do with the expectations of society and these pillars of tradition. What might that look like 50 years ago, 100 years ago, with people who probably even felt more strongly about these expectations. So I think there is stuff to explore there. However, it did get cut because in this novella, we're very focused on the here and now. We're following these current relationships. So I didn't necessarily feel like that served the story, but there is, I think, more to be explored there. And, who knows? We might revisit eventually.
I love it. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I feel like you knew exactly how much we needed to know to understand this story, but it was also very clear that like this is a world and you knew what you were doing, that like the reader doesn't need to know every step, that if there are future iterations, like you have some material to pull from, there'll be consistency. When I was reading this, I was thinking of like the Game of Thrones books, like
Oh,
oddly enough,
wow.
right, which I have not read in a really, really long time. And I've read other much more like comparable stuff, but I was thinking about like all of the history that goes into Game of Thrones, and then
Yeah.
Fire and Blood. Fire and Blood is like a history book, and like I bought it a couple years ago thinking it was going to be like another Game of Thrones like novel book, and I got like 80 out of pages in, and I was like, where is the dialogue? And then I realized it was a
Yeah.
history book and not that. And like that's the complete opposite end example of that. And that's obviously for a market of people who are like invested in this world, and that's all well and good. But even in like the Game of Thrones novels, there's so much stuff that you need to like try to understand to
Yeah.
enjoy the story. And this was the complete opposite, where like you don't necessarily need to like understand the history of this world, but it's
Yeah.
great that you, the author, understand the history of this
Sure.
world.
No, I know exactly what you mean. That's something that I had in mind is or even just sort of naturally. I was like, what makes this story approachable? What keeps it light? Cuz at the end of the day, this is a very light, just cozy, comfy read. So we don't really need to get into a lot of the heavy stuff. Yeah, that was something that I was also conscious of in writing as well, was just kind of keeping us moving, keeping the pace, keeping yeah, just an approachable vibe.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one of the things that kind of related to that I really liked about the story is you had kind of a really deft hand in like the amount or the number of fantasy elements. I've never written fantasy. I've read a good amount of it. I'm not like the world's biggest fantasy reader.
Mhm.
But I always think about like how does an author even like go about that? So I'm wondering, how did you strike the balance of how different the world of Touched is from like the earth that we
Yeah.
live in?
Yeah. Well, I'm with you. I do enjoy fantasy. I don't read a lot of high fantasy. So this is sort of a more approachable level again, where we have sort of the familiar elements and the familiar beats of what makes a fantasy story while keeping it light and very readable. If this isn't necessarily a beach read in terms of like content, but like this is a breeze that is just meant to be fun. So I think that was also sort of mirrored in the prose itself, where it is very romantic. It feels sort of fantasy in or like olden times y kind of language. It's very romantic language, but without being overly archaic or needing a dictionary every page. Like this is something that anybody ought to be able to pick up and enjoy, and that was the goal.
The It
Thank
was
you.
one of the first things that I took away from, reading this story was just like the prose and the dialogue and how these characters speak. Like it felt like a treat. It felt like I was reading something that had all of the cool parts of an older book, but all of the cool parts of like a modern accessible book. So I really enjoyed that. And I hope other people who do check this out feel the same, because it was really great. I've read some other fantasy that just has all different spans of like how modern do these characters talk, and how, like elevated do these characters talk. I feel like you've really struck a nice balance there.
Thank you.
Okay. So Touch follows three different relationships that develop on their own timelines within the duration of the novella. Can you share more about why you decided to follow three different relationships in the story?
Yeah, so it kind of just unfolded that way. My initial idea was more of a like love triangle situation. The concept was, you have this person who has fallen in love with this person unexpectedly. It's just a sudden romance. But then this person appears and they're like engaged. They're supposed to be married. So, what if we take that idea, but instead of this introduced character being an antagonist, being someone who is there to like foil everything, what if they're an ally? And really support the couple actually. I just thought that idea was really interesting. And then in the idea of romance, like I wanted everyone to be happy. I just wanted this to be just a happy time. So they like, what if this introduced person falls in love as well with someone else? So we ended up with this sort of fast burn initial relationship. This third person gets a slow burn with somebody else. And then just because I wanted a little bit of everything, what if we have a third couple who is just like already burning? What if there's a stable, loving relationship already and they are interacting with all of these other characters individually and they just kind of ground the whole story? And honestly, I think that third couple is kind of the sleeper hit. Like they ended up being my favorite. So, yeah, it was just the variety of it and just like wanting to have my cake and eat it too. I just wanted all the kinds of love. I wanted it all.
Yeah, I've been working on a romance novel that I will turn into a series, even though they say romance doesn't do series. I'm gonna make it happen.
Hell
And
yeah.
so much of it is like, I had the main couple, that's the main story. And well, those people have friends, they have siblings, they have other people that like they interact with, and they're probably gonna be peers. They're probably gonna like be dating and falling in love too. And
Yeah.
so many things just kind of, spark out from that web. And that's not unlike how maybe a little bit less in like today's day with like dating apps, but maybe the times of the past a little bit. Like people would find their partners through like people they knew and
Yeah.
introductions. And this was a really fun way to explore that. And I feel like so often in romance, like the story is just about like one couple getting together and then they end and like we got our either happily ever after with like an epilogue jump or like happy for now. That kind of makes sense for the timing. But we very rarely see like established relationships. And that's, as you said, your sleeper hit. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed seeing that where like they're happy and then something happens and their relationship progresses, but we're not seeing them at like when they meet. And it was really fun to see. I really enjoyed that, and I think readers would too. Not the main reason I want to talk to you, but the thing that was like, we should talk about this. Touched has two different versions. A closed door and an open door version for different couples of spice. I have only read the open door version, so I'm not familiar with the closed door version. But it's a really fun concept. So I'm wondering, what was your inspiration to write two different versions of the same story?
Yeah, well, you're not alone. Thus far, the open door version is what is poppin'. That's what people are interested in, which I guess I'm not too surprised by. But when I initially set out to start writing, I did not have spice in mind at all. It wasn't something that I had done before, and it just kind of happened. Just, the scene unfolded before me, and there it was. So then I had the question of, okay, well, I was kind of surprised by this. It's not something I've written before. And I did give some thought to my previous catalog, which did not have spice. And I just really didn't want to surprise anybody with it. Even if it was clearly marked and, marketed as such, I would just like, I don't want to jump scare anyone with an open door scene. So I figured maybe having another version which people could opt for if they wanted would be nice. So it's just, I thought it would be nice to have something that anybody could feel comfortable with, whichever version they wanted. Um, and also, just as an aside, everything that I have put out, I enjoy getting an author copy and handing it to my mom. I just think that's nice, but I just could not hand a super spicy book to my mom. And she's welcome to read it if she wants. She can go and get it on her own time. I just could not
Right.
physically hand it to her. So, and it even says in the descriptions, because they're very clearly marked if you're looking at them, which one is which. And it even says like the pink one's for my mom. So like if you want to gift it to someone, you don't have to gift them the spicy one. Get them the nice clean one.
That is so considerate because my best friend for Christmas last year, she had been reading some of the Akatar books, and then I like read a little bit faster than she does, and she was doing grad school. And so I skipped up and went ahead.
Hmm.
And so for Christmas, I was like, oh, great. I will get her the rest of the books so that way she can like read them on her own time, but that way she like has them. And I did not know that A Court of Silver Flames is as spicy as it was or
Yeah.
is until after I had already like purchased this and sent it to her.
Yeah.
Like, luckily, she kind of knows what she signed up for, but that is really, really considerate to think about people who may be giving this as a gift and that there are two different options
Yeah.
for, the recipient's preferences as well. And then, this is a really, fun story, and I love digging into how do people like come up with these ideas at all for their story? So, what was the biggest inspiration for Touched?
So there's obviously influences as far back as childhood and like Disney. It's the fairy tale centered around a royal that is sort of the core of it. But what was very actively an influence was Touch was initially like the very like zero draft of it was written a couple years back. And at the time, I was very much into webtoons, and I had been a webtoon reader for several years and followed these different stories for quite some time. A lot of those are centered on a royal, their romances are a lot of times more dramatic and sometimes have like a darker sort of twist. But that I think was what got me interested in that initial love triangle thing that kind of morphed into something else. So they are usually sort of darker or have these like real antagonists to them. So I wanted to adapt that and make like, what if we can root for everybody in the cast? What if you want everyone to succeed? So that was my initial thought. And then also what I wanted to adjust from the webtoon was that format really encourages stories to go on for like hundreds of episodes. And what gets frustrating about that, at least for me, is that to achieve that length, there's sort of a lot of going in circles where people aren't really learning from their mistakes a lot of the time, or there's a lot of miscommunication, and that got frustrating for me. So, how can I take this concept, make it cozy, comfy, and also tell the story in a more succinct way?
That's one of the kind of cool parts about reading and consuming media so widely is that you get inspiration not just from the things you want to emulate, but the things you want to adapt and twist. And I think that's, we're seeing like the rise of the interconnected
Mm-hmm.
standalone world of romance. And I've read a couple two different authors that kind of have that going on, and that's kind of their response is like each individual story stands alone, so like you see a satisfying arc, and if you want to continue, well, there's another like book in this world. If you don't read it, you still are satisfied with like whatever you read from the first one. So it's been really interesting seeing how people respond to wanting a complete story in like a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah.
And then as we touched on here, haha.
Haha.
I can say that because I get puns made on my name all the time. So I so rarely do it in my world because I'm just so used to it. But Touched is a novella length work at around 170 pages. I'm wondering, can you speak a little bit about your approach to the story of that length?
Yeah, so thus far my method has just been to write until I feel like it's done, and thankfully I've managed to make that work for me. And what has also been really freeing is that I've been self-published. I haven't really dealt with even trying to publish traditionally. Maybe someday I will, but for now I've really appreciated the freedom that brings. So, yeah, not really having to worry too much about word count, whether it's to, like, I did consider, I feel like the main market in publishing is novel. So I did consider that. And I just felt like the story was complete and we had what we needed. And, novellas are also popular. So let's go with that.
Yeah, I like having read it and knowing I knew going into it that it was about 170 pages, and I can imagine now in my mind, okay, if you were like trying to get this to be like a novel length for the traditional market or because you felt like you had to for any reason, I can see, okay, like this is where that scene would have gone on longer, or we would have had this subplot, or there would have been like more extraneous characters that we like didn't need. Like, not to
Hmm.
say that it wouldn't have been delightful to read because you're a great writer, but the story only needed to be as long as it needed to be. And I really think that it's interesting seeing people in the self-publishing space make their own rules and decide this is what it needs. It doesn't need to be longer. We don't need to shove more content into it for the sake of like an arbitrary thing. So, and a lot of books, like older classic popular books, had like lower word counts. And I think that's because like they had to be written on like typewriters, like back in like the
Yeah.
50s and 60s. Like a lot of these like classic novels that I read for like my English degree back in the day, like thinking about word count back then, but now that I've gotten into the writing world, I've went back and tried to be like, okay, my book is as long as this thing, just for people's references. And, so many of these books that, we probably read in school are like 55 to 60,000 words. And it's like, oh, we should
Hmm.
bring more of that back.
Yeah. Or you get the opposite where it's a beloved work and people will say, I really love this, but there's the sections where they describe a tree for 4 pages. Like
Right.
there is a happy middle. And some people love that. I am not one of those people. So
Same.
yeah, something for everyone.
I picked up Les Miserables, which I had never read. And I was like, I should read literature because this whole year for me has been reading romance novels to like get comparable titles for, the queering journey that I went on for the traditional publishing market and no regrets. So I was like, I need like a brain break. And, I got this copy and yeah, it's obviously translated. I don't speak French. And I was like, this is a lot of description for where is our guy? It's so long. I had to like put
Yeah.
it down. I was like, oh, my brain needs a workout. But I think that's because it's like we did not need all that description. Like I'd be so, curious if someone wrote something like that today, what an editor would do with it and,
Yeah.
how much, we don't necessarily need things to fit like the exact point plot beat. I find that a little bit too formulaic, but definitely, we can have some creativity. And I feel like having a shorter page or word count is like just a really neat part of self-publishing that, you don't have to listen to anyone's rules.
Yeah. I've enjoyed it.
And then one thing that, you were discussing on Blue Sky that I found really interesting, you mentioned wanting to avoid slash turn like the miscommunication trope on its head. And I found that you did this really successfully in this novella. If you didn't, I wouldn't be talking about this right now. But I'm wondering, how did you go about taking like beloved slash love to hate trope, have like reworking it to serve your story?
Well, thank you, first of all. Yeah, it was definitely a conscious choice insofar as knowing that it was going to be novella length and wanting to just sort of cut out that filler that is not only not really needed, but also frustrating to me. And I think just having characters who are emotionally intelligent and good communicators. And, there's people who enjoy the miscommunication trope, and that's not even necessarily unrealistic. A lot of people in real life are not good communicators. I like to surround myself with good communicators. I like to read about good communicators. So, yeah, it was just having characters who they might misunderstand each other at times, or, initially this relationship might start out as a secret thing. And so they're sort of keeping that on the down low for a minute. But when they do speak to each other, they're checking in with each other, they're apologizing when necessary. And then during the spicy scenes, there is just a brief back and forth about consent as well, which I feel like authors might fear that having that sort of verbal back and forth might take you out of the scene, but I'm here to tell you that that really is not so. It can be within the moment, it can be in the voice of the scene. And not only is that an important message, but also it's just something that, I don't know, it's refreshing to me. And yeah, I mean, I hope that it was successful insofar as I'm thinking specifically of a later scene with our slow burn. We're finally getting there. And that very in their sort of romantic dialogue that they're having back and forth, he says, I must be assured that I do no wrong by you. And her very enthusiastic response of like, by all means, like, let's, it to me, that's like, hell yeah, that's getting us into the scene in a way that's very satisfying after the buildup, but also they're speaking to each other. That's it at the end of the day. Like, let the characters speak to each other and hear each other.
Right, absolutely. Consent can be sexy, and it absolutely can. And, it's like make these people talk to one another. And at times, yeah, maybe people stumble over their words, but they're trying, or people misunderstand each other because like nobody's perfect. And ultimately, how characters, respond if there are misunderstandings, how they make an effort to, like get to know these other people or ask for consent, like that, I think tells the reader a lot about the characters, and it allows like fun new things to, for the author to explore.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of this comes from like movies where it's like it's a montage scene and then it like
Yeah.
fades to black because it's like, a movie in like theaters. But it's like books are different. We have a little bit longer,
Yeah.
we don't like we can dig into those things. And I
Well,
feel like what I really enjoyed about this story is that like in the spicy scenes, it felt like true to life, not like, okay, we're taking a movie and bookifying it, which I feel like happens in a lot of romance novels. Like,
Exactly. Well, in another scene, it's just even like a look and then she like nods and giggles. Like that is consent as well.
right,
And it, like you said, the sort of montage scene doesn't really work when you're supposed to be reading something that's happening in real time, where most people aren't just like silent. There's not a backtrack playing right now in the background. Like there would be some sort of interaction between these people. So that's that. But then, even spicy scenes aside, having a character apologize and be like, this thing that I thought, I'm understanding now that that hurt you and wasn't good for you. So, feel free to like ignore me, like don't do the thing. Just having these sort of real moments, and especially because this is a cast, they're a family. So these things would be happening all the time. I just really wanted characters who talked to each other and weren't afraid of that communication.
right. And I felt it was really refreshing. And that's one of the things that I love most about fantasy as a genre. Like, when you're reading something that is supposed to really emulate like today's world, it might feel inauthentic to have characters that are like too good of communicators, for their age range or
Sure.
whatever. And what I love about fantasy is that like we don't have to take our current society's notions into it. And we
Mm-hmm.
can say, yeah, in this society, people at this like stage of their development would have better communication. And that's like really awesome and freeing to read as a reader. And I feel like that's just one of the like underrated parts of fantasy is getting to like,
Yeah.
make your own rules and that we can like delete the kind of drawbacks to things in our like present day cultural communication.
Very astute.
Interestingly enough, the backbone of my like novel that I have in progress, the character is in a class about intercultural communication. So it's on the brain. I'm not just like weirdly good at this. Touches a different genre than your other releases. And so I'm wondering what's your approach to varying the different writing styles that you take on?
Yeah, so my initial publication, my trilogy, was an action adventure fantasy. So still fantasy, but a lot heavier on the action adventure side of things. Touched as a romantasy. I've actually put out a photography guide previously, which is very left field. And then yeah, my works in progress are all over the place. Mystery, rom-com, a whodunit, like they're genuinely everywhere. And I just find that variety is the spice of life. I like to just like sample a little bit of everything. And even when I'm not writing, like I enjoy creating music for my stories. I like, drawing the characters. I just find it very fulfilling to let my whims take me where they do. And thus far, and I also have the privilege of self-publishing, so I can kind of just do whatever I want. So I haven't really felt the pressure to choose a niche and just stick with it. And hopefully that will translate to any sort of audience that I might accumulate if you enjoy the writing, because readers don't typically just read literally one genre all the time either. You might have your favorite genre, but you're picking up whichever books look interesting and checking those out. So, if you like my writing, you might like this other thing in this other genre that you might not have thought about. And yeah, hopefully that's a journey that I can go on and readers would appreciate as well.
Having one author where you already know that you enjoy how they write, their prose, their storytelling, their pacing, all those elements, that can be a really accessible way to like explore a new genre that like or revisit a genre you haven't like read in quite a while because you already know, okay, I'm gonna enjoy this. I feel like there are some readers that they'll read all over the place. And then there are other readers that like they do kind of stick with their one to two things that they're comfortable with. When I was kind of getting back into reading, I was usually reading on vacation, like usually on a flight. I'm like,
Sure.
I want to know that I'm gonna enjoy this. And so how do I find the things that I don't want to like know the ending of the book, but I just want to know that I'm not going to be like stuck on this flight with a book that I hate. Now my solution is I just like read on my iPad and I have a couple like backup options, but this was a little bit ago in my life. And some of the ways that I would do that is exploring like an author's other works. And there are so many authors in the traditional publishing space that write under like pen names for other
Mm-hmm.
genres. I don't think authors should have to do that. I understand branding is a thing. I'm a marketer in my day job, like I do get it. But I think for some, it's kind of fun to bop around. I don't feel like, okay, well, if I read this other thing, you're gonna enjoy what you enjoyed about that author's, approach to writing, whatever it is that you connect with as a reader. So I think it's really fun to see. And I think that audiences are receptive to that because I am. And there's more people out there like me. So
Yeah. Well, and at the end of the day, too, it's just for the fun of it. I write just to bring joy to my own life. So, um, yeah, I'm just gonna keep chasing that and keep it fun. That's what I'm all
yeah,
about.
that's what's so cool about the self publishing world is that some people do pursue it as a full-time career, some people do it as a part-time thing, some people just do it for the love of the game. And it's just really nice to be able to have like a formalized thing that you can share your work with other people, through these platforms. So I love that approach, especially for someone who is doing it for their own enjoyment and just sharing, their creation with others who might want to like tune in.
Yeah.
Okay. And this one is really fun. If you revisit the world of touch in a future story, what is one aspect of the world building that you are excited to dig into more?
Yeah, I actually have a work in progress that is just the tiniest little seedling of a thing. So we'll see if it has legs. What I am interested in would be there's some fantasy elements that we kind of so this novella touched was kind of like fantasy light edition. It's very approachable for anybody whether you read like high fantasy or not. And the follow-up would still be that, I would say, but more into the fantasy realm, more sort of magical abilities and creatures that we kind of got a little sample of in touched, but that I think have more to be explored. And then also perhaps sort of a conflict with the kingdom of Umbris, which is mentioned a couple of times throughout the book. They're sort of vaguely antagonistic, another kingdom. So what would that conflict look like? What's interesting about this idea is that it's quite a tonal shift to go from just pure love and romance on all fronts to like potentially war. That's quite a difference. But I have a vision and I think it could be fun. So we'll see.
I am sure it would be fun. And I know you just mentioned that you have like the seedlings of the idea, but I already can't wait. Please send me an ARC copy.
Thank
I'm
you.
ready. I want the follow up because as you mentioned, like this first story is cozy and about love, but you still built a world to tell that story and there's more going on. And I think that that's one of the things that I think has made romantasy so successful is that readers have they connect with characters and they want more. And that's where, romantasy can really kind of fulfill that because there's so much cool ways that you can take a story. So I'm really excited to dig into more. I know, the elements that you're referring to, and it's
Hmm.
really, I think it's also really rewarding for readers that do stick with a series if they go back and be like, oh, that's the like thing that, is the little nugget that turned into this other thing and in book 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 and it feels like, oh, it's fun whether they picked it up the first time or whether they pick it up on like a reread. So
Hmm.
that's one thing that I'm really excited about if you continue this. Please let me read it.
Okay, I will give it some serious thought.
Yes, do it. I know that's very much easier said than
Yeah,
we go write the thing, and it is a much different endeavor to actually have to write the thing, but I enjoyed it, and I'm sure that others will too.
thank you.